done?
Yeah.
After a year of shielding, a moment of relief for 13-year-old Catherine and her family.
And you were very brave, weren't you?
Oh, wow.
And did it hurt?
It doesn't.
But she is the exception. Her mum spent months fighting to get her a COVID jab as the UK lagged behind the United States, Europe and Israel on vaccinations for under 16s. What was that moment like when you knew that she was going to be able to get one?
It was such a relief that we could have some kind of, going back to normal life and be in the same boat as everyone else, because we were in a different boat to everyone else. I think that's what's been forgotten slightly, is that people with children who were shielding were missing out on their education and all the other services, and the stress on our mental health and the mental health of our children, I think, was enormous.
There are still many families, though, with clinically vulnerable children still stuck in isolation. But that could be about to end, with the Pfizer vaccine today approved for use on 12 to 15-year-olds by the UK regulator.
I'm absolutely delighted, because I know what a difference it's going to make to them. And I'm trying to help some other families get the vaccine in the way that we did. And I just, talking to them, I understand the stress that they're still under.
So school-aged children look to be next in line for the vaccine rollout, something many scientists welcome. Most pupils aren't at risk from COVID, but they can transmit the virus, and that is thought to be a factor in the worrying rise in case rates.
What we're seeing now is that cases are highest in school-aged children, school outbreaks are increasing, it's quite disruptive to education. So from that benefit, I think to protect education when we go back in September would be really beneficial.
Today, 6,238 new COVID cases were recorded. That's almost double what it was just a week ago. So what does this mean for the next stop on the reopening roadmap? When we think about June 21st and opening up, is it time to pause?
The 21st June is a bit of a distraction. Like, now we're not in control of cases. Now this variant is doubling every week. For me, what we have to do if we want to avoid restrictions in the future is actually really go full in on things like supported isolation, mitigations in schools, mitigations in workplaces, so that we can get cases down now before it becomes a much bigger problem.
Matt Hancock was all smiles today, but the occasion was a sombre one. A tree planting ceremony alongside other G7 health ministers to remember those who have died during the pandemic. When asked about the future, though, he was still going over the same ground.
It's too early to make a decision about the step on the that will happen not before the 21st of June. We're looking at the data every single day, and we'll make a decision and publish it later in this month.
But with just over 2 weeks to go to that all-important date and the data heading in the wrong direction, we still don't know which way that decision will go.
Well, joining me now is Professor Anthony Harnden, who's Deputy Chair of the Government's Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Professor Harnden, thanks very much for joining us. So just because we can vaccinate 12 to 15-year-olds doesn't necessarily mean we should. You're on the committee which will advise the government on this. What will your advice be?
Well, I think you've summed it up. We can do now, which is an excellent piece of news, the fact that the MHRA have approved the vaccine 12 to 16, this is the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and the fact that we have sufficient supply of the vaccine is good news. But the question then becomes whether we vaccinate children. We've got to be clear, if we vaccinate children, the reasons for why we are vaccinating children. And there are two reasons. One is for the direct benefit of them, and that may be, though we know that the majority of children this is only a very mild illness, there are a minority that get severely ill, and such as those with neurodisabilities we're particularly concerned about. And there are children and young people that get long COVID. And there are potential educational disruptions, particularly during examination years. So those are the arguments of direct benefit to them. And of course, then there are indirect benefits to the wider adult population in terms of transmission and in terms of protecting other unvaccinated or people that haven't responded to the vaccine for whatever reason. So we need to weigh up all these considerations very carefully. But if we are mainly vaccinating children for the indirect benefit of them, then there becomes ethical considerations. We'll be looking at the safety data. Now, the MHRA have approved the vaccine for use, so it is safe in the clinical trials, But of course, that's very different from rolling out to millions and millions of children. And we'll be looking very carefully at what the United States are doing in terms of vaccinating their population to see if there are any emerging safety data.
And for all of those reasons, there may be issues about having to persuade parents, won't there? Because we vaccinate for illnesses like measles and mumps because they're considered childhood illnesses. But asking parents to allow their children to be vaccinated for something which is extremely unlikely to make them ill may be problematic.
I think so. And there's consent issues for children themselves. A lot of children, school-age children, are certainly secondary school children, are fully able to give informed consent. So we'll be looking at those sort of consent and operational issues which would come in to any program that we advise. But I think there are so many different checks and balances in this particular decision that I think the advice that we'll end up giving will be a range of potential options, and then ultimately it will be up to ministers to decide.
And that presumably means this decision won't come quickly.
No, we'll be debating this over the weeks to come. We don't need to make this decision too quickly because, of course, we've still got a lot of unvaccinated adults, and we would not be prioritising children and young people before the adult population because we know that the predominant risk factor for severe COVID is age, and therefore we need to get through, keep the programme moving at speed and vaccinate those hitherto unvaccinated individuals first.
Professor Harnden, thanks very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you.